LiSTNR production.
Hi, Sacha Barbour Gatt with you for this episode of The Briefing. There are Australians behind bars for murder before a body has even been found. One of those is Chris Dawson, who has just finished up a 3-day hearing to appeal his murder conviction of killing his wife Lynn back in the 1980s.
It's a special kind of torture for the family that's still living, still looking for this person.
Today we're talking to a former inspector of police about how authorities search for a body and how these cases have changed Australian law. But first, Simon Beaton is here with the headlines. It is Monday, the 20th of May.
A search is underway today for the president of Iran after the helicopter he was travelling in crashed in thick fog. Ebrahim Raisi and his foreign minister were on the way back from a visit to the country's border with Azerbaijan when the aircraft went down. Rescue teams and drones are currently trying to find the site, but it's been made more difficult because of the foggy conditions in the remote and very mountainous region.
An Iranian official claims they have made contact with 2 people who are on board the chopper, which indicates the crash might not have been severe. However, another official who spoke anonymously to Iranian news agency IRNA said they are hopeful that everything's okay, but that the information coming from the crash site is very concerning. Bit of background on Raisi, the president. He was elected after a second attempt at running in 2021. Since taking office, he has ordered a real tightening of morality laws, which has caused a surge in protests. Thus, there's been a crackdown on anti-government protests in response. He's also pushed hard in nuclear talks with world powers. So definitely a polarising figure.
A man is set to be charged after allegedly stabbing a police officer in Sydney CBD. So the officer had been carrying out traffic duties when he was attacked yesterday afternoon, copping 2 skull fractures.
That 33-year-old male has produced a kitchen-style knife about 30 centimetres long and stabbed the male constable in the back of the head a number of times.
Yeah, despite this, he managed to chase down the alleged attacker, who was eventually tasered and arrested, and the officer is now in a stable condition. The 33-year-old man who has been arrested is known to police, but not for violence or mental health issues. Video footage of his arrest shows him holding the knife and demanding the chasing officers shoot him.
Yeah, this was wild. The cop that was attacked then gave chase to this bloke, and there is footage of him. He ran around the corner of Sydney CBD into Hyde Park, and he was kind of like backing away, and there were cops there with their tasers out. Police say the stabbing did appear to be random. And we did recently look into knife crime in Australia because it just feels like there have been so many instances lately. The expert we spoke to says the stats haven't caught up yet. We don't know if there's been an increase according to the statistics that are available publicly because they're usually released there's this 1 year difference. So the next stats that we get are going to be from 2023 still. So they're not even going to be from recently. I know that for me, in public, we work in the CBD here in Sydney and, walking around, I'm definitely I feel a little on edge. Like I'm not to, I'm usually pretty whatever. Like if it happens, it happens. There's crime everywhere, all the time, every day. This does just feel a little bit pervasive at the moment. The fact that this man has allegedly run up to a police officer randomly on a Sunday afternoon, it does feel a little scary.
I definitely agree.
A trigger warning for this next story. It discusses domestic violence. Rapper Sean Diddy Combs has admitted to beating his ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura in the hallway of a hotel in 2016. Why has he admitted to it? Well, CNN released video footage showing what happened. Now, Combs has released an apology on social media. Here's what he said.
It's so difficult to reflect on the darkest times in your life. Sometimes you got to do that. I was f***ed up. I hit rock bottom, but I make no excuses. My behavior on that video is inexcusable. I take full responsibility for my actions in that video. I'm disgusted. I was disgusted then when I did it. I'm disgusted now.
Yeah, that footage that was released by CNN is pretty confronting. It shows Combs wearing just a white towel. He chases her down this hotel hallway. He's shown punching, kicking, shoving and dragging Cassie, even throwing a vase in her direction at one point. Now, Cassie sued Combs last November over what she claimed were years of abuse. That lawsuit was settled the following day for an unspecified amount. But a number of lawsuits against him have sprung up since Cassie launched legal action, with accusations of sex trafficking, sexual abuse and rape, all of which he has denied. Now, my question after seeing this video, which is really horrible, I wouldn't recommend anyone look at it.
No.
It's awful, was, well, is he going to be charged? He can't be charged in LA where the offence took place because it has past the statute of limitations, which is the timeline that is needed for it has to happen. A charge has to be laid before the statute of limitations wraps up, which is really disappointing and therefore not surprising that he's come out on social media and said, yeah, look, I did it. I'm really, really sorry, because he can't be charged for it. And there are claims that he did pay the hotel to take the security footage at the time. Word is it was $50,000 US, which is about 75,000 Australian. And I also want to mention the number. If you are listening to this and you need help, if you're experiencing domestic violence, you can call 1-800-RESPECT. Or if you need to talk to someone, you can call Lifeline on 13 11 14.
And changing pace to finish up with something much lighter and brighter, how many Kyles do you think you need in a single place to break a world record? More than 700 is the answer. So the city of Kyle in Texas has tried to gather the biggest number of people with the same name in one location to nab the Guinness record, with 706 people called Kyle turning out over the weekend. However, they fell short of the current achievement, which belongs to Bosnia. That got 2,325 people named Ivan together in 2017. It's not the first time the Kyles have come gunning for the Ivans. Last year, the official count at what has become known as the Gathering of the Kyles clocked in at 1,490. I don't think they're doing that well. If last year they were at 1,490, this year they're only at 700. I don't think they've really got a chance of taking down the Ivans.
The Kyles are losing interest in the city of Kyle. I was wondering when I read this story, what could we try for here? You think Aussie name, Shazza or Bazza or something. But according to the latest research, which is 2022, so this report was released last year. The new report I know is actually about to come out. I'm waiting for it because I find this stuff fascinating. But in Australia, the most popular boy's name is actually Oliver, and that's held the top spot for 10 years. And for girls, it's Charlotte. And this is according to the McCrindle research, which was released last year.
But see, I still feel like Olivers or Charlottes, even say when they're adults, would have a hard time taking down the title. As did you know that, over time, the number of Olivers, for example, that would take out the top spot is a lot fewer than, say, a few decades ago.
Because people aren't having as many babies?
Well, no, because there is more diversification of names. So the most popular name isn't as popular
as it would have been back in the day. That makes sense. I also went on to try and find some of the least popular names, names that are falling out of favour. I could only find stats for the UK, but this one I found funny. Gary is at risk of going extinct in the UK. Graham and Nigel as well. I'm sorry, I cannot imagine seeing a newborn baby. No offense to anyone who's decided to call their baby that, but going, oh, look at this newborn baby Nigel. That's terrible.
Baby Graham, that's not so bad.
For girls, Angela and Kimberly are falling out of favour as well, which I found interesting. Simon, thanks so much for being here for the headlines today. Next up, we're looking into investigations involving murder when there's no body. The search for a missing person can capture the eyes of the nation. We've seen the recent case out of Ballarat with missing mum Samantha Murphy. Another really high-profile case is that of Chris Dawson. Right now, we're waiting to hear the outcome of the former NRL player's appeal against the murder conviction he copped in 2022 for the death of his former wife, Lynette Simms. The murder happened in 1982, but her body has never been found. So what happens behind the scenes of one of these investigations? And how can we charge a person with murder when the victim's remains are missing? Journalist Tessa Randello is from the LiSTNR Newsroom, and she's spoken with former New South Wales Detective Anthony Macklin about this topic and how the law has been forced to adapt in these cases. Tessa, welcome to the briefing. Let's start with the Chris Dawson case. This has captured the eyes of the nation for years now, but there's a new update. Tell me about it.
There is a new update, so I guess I'll start right at the start. 33-year-old Lynette Simms went missing in December of 1982, and her husband Chris Dawson was charged with the murder in 2018 and convicted of killing her in 2022. The judge found that Dawson committed the murder because he was having a relationship with a teenager who worked as his babysitter, and he wanted to get rid of his wife, and he is now appealing that sentence. So the 3-day court hearing was held last week. We're now just waiting for the verdict, and Dawson's legal team have identified 5 different grounds for appeal, and that includes that the verdict was unreasonable and unable to be supported.
And I think what put this case back in the headlines, you said that he wasn't charged until 2018, and it was this podcast called Teacher's Pet. Now, searches for Lynn continued well after she went missing. So 18 years later at her home in Bayview, that was in the year 2000, and then again in 2018. And this was off the back of reporting by the Teacher's Pet podcast. What helped spark this new search, and how do we see this play out in other cases?
So obviously we got a lot of attention on that case specifically when that podcast came out. It was so popular, happened quite a few years before those 2018 searches actually happened. But I spoke with the director for Precision Integrity Services, Anthony Macklin, and he's also contributed to our listener podcast, Crime Insiders. And during his time as a New South Wales Inspector of Police and a detective, he worked on some of these investigations. He said that finding a body is really important to investigators. Obviously, it's really important to the family because they want to know where the person is and, you know, based on whatever religious beliefs or other feelings they may have, they want to kind of honour the body in the way that feels the best for them. But the location and the body itself also hold a lot of information for investigators. So he had this insight on what can spark a new search, even if it's many years later.
You might have someone that comes up with new information saying, look, I saw a car similar to that, or I saw someone that looked like that in this particular location. It could be something as simple as we know that there was an excavation site taking place there for a building or some other kind of thing, and that was close by and the person may have had knowledge of that. So you're exploring all options, but each is based on what other evidence is taking place at the time or is available at the time, so that you can determine what is the most likely location.
Yeah, so the Chris Dawson case was obviously really big, and it was, re-entered the cultural zeitgeist because of the Teacher's Pet podcast, but there can be all sorts of small things that can spark searches years later. I know police often put out releases saying we're trying to solve this cold case. So it all does seem to be in the context of the individual cases.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I guess with those kind of police information, when they call for more information, it's generally them trying to get some of those sightings and bits and pieces like that. But here's what Anthony Macklin had to say about bringing charges against someone and prosecuting them when we still haven't found a body.
People will say that's a circumstantial case and there's a belief that a circumstantial case is weak. I hold an opposite opinion to that. I believe that every individual case has an element of circumstance to it. But when we discuss circumstantial cases, there's an analogy used that a circumstantial case is like a rope. A rope is made up of individual strands, and those strands by themselves are weak. But when you put those strands together with 100 other strands and you wrap them together, the rope is quite strong. Now, if one of those strands breaks, the whole rope doesn't break.
So the Lynette Simms case did actually end up changing some of the laws in New South Wales, because sometimes you'll have in different cases an accused killer saying, I'm not releasing the details of the body for whatever reason, whether that's, they're trying to say, I'm not guilty, I don't know where the body is. In the case of Chris Dawson, that's what we see. He maintains his innocence and says, I can't tell you where the body is because I don't know where the body is. That's his claim. And what we've seen in New South Wales is changes to the laws, and they're called no body, no parole laws. Basically, if you're convicted, you don't give up the location of a body, you'll never get parole. Are other states following suit?
So there was actually some other states that had these rules before New South Wales. So when New South Wales brought these changes in 2022, we were behind some other states and actually bringing them up to the same level. So similar laws are already in the Northern Territory, Queensland, South Australia and Western Australia. But Queensland's the only state that publishes the actual data from whether or not we've been able to find a body from a no body, no parole law. So of the 10 cases that came before their parole board during the collection period, 6 of them involved cooperation by the applicant, so that's the person who has been convicted. But unfortunately, none of them resulted in the actual remains being found. But Anthony Macklin reckons these are a great idea.
You've got nothing to gain if you give the information about where that body is. You're really just helping the family, and that's the thing. It's a special kind of torture for the family that's still living, still looking for this person without any idea where to look or any knowledge of how, if they will find this person. And in these particular instances, that offender still holds the power to manipulate and harass and menace a person without doing anything else but withholding that information. And in that way, I think the parole laws are fantastic to help leverage a person towards doing the right thing.
Yeah, he makes a good point. But what about people who are wrongfully convicted?
Yeah, so Australia doesn't really have a lot of data on people who are wrongfully convicted, which makes it really interesting. I guess it comes up a lot when we talk about Kelly Lane, who is currently also going through the courts. She also has professed her innocence for many, many years. And in the US, research suggests that 3% of their convictions could be wrongful, but there's really no way to know for sure. Anthony Macklin says there's a much lower chance of that actually happening here in Australia.
The Australian legal system is designed on this principle that it's better that 10 guilty men walk free than one innocent man go to jail. And there's been a lot of talk in recent years about wrongful prosecutions. But much of that information we're seeing is coming out of the United States, where policing and the court system is vastly different to how it exists here in Australia and New South Wales. We have so many avenues for appeal. The system allows for evidence to be argued in and out before a jury's even heard a shred of the evidence.
That's a really interesting perspective that I hadn't thought about, because we see some really high-profile cases come out from the US of people spending 40-plus years in jail, and it turns out DNA evidence found that they were wrongfully convicted. But it could happen here, there's no doubt.
Yes, it could happen. And like I said, it's really hard to know because if people who have done the crime say that they're innocent, that kind of muddies all the waters for everyone.
Yeah. Well, the New South Wales Supreme Court will hand down its decision on Chris Dawson's appeal in the coming weeks, and we may end up seeing if the new laws push him to reveal the location of Lynn's body. But given his age and the fact that he's been convicted and he is still maintaining his innocence, sadly for Lynn's family, that doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. Tessa, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's briefing. That is all for this episode. A reminder, we put out full eps of our weekend briefing chats on YouTube. You can search LiSTNR Newsroom to see those. And you can also catch up with our other video content on TikTok. We're at LiSTNR Newsroom there. Also on Instagram, which is at The Briefing Podcast. And finally, if you liked this ep, why not share it with someone you think might enjoy it too? I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. See you next time.
LiSTNR.